It's a great pleasure and honor to address such a distinguished audience. Usually people come here to make lectures. Let me change these rules, and probably I'll give a very short introduction. It's much more important for me to listen to your advices and to listen to your questions, and I am ready to answer any questions you'll raise. This is a very dramatic time for my country. And what's going on was absolutely and entirely unpredictable for me and unacceptable for the world. With no reason, with no grounds, our partner in the past, but I still believe that this country would be a partner in the future, started an incursion into the Ukrainian territory, started to invade an independent and sovereign country. My country is facing both military and economic challenges. We still believe that there is an option to tackle this military crisis with the political and diplomatic tools. As time is going and clock is ticking, these chances are not as big as were, for example, last week. But these options, these tools, are still on the table. We urge Russian Federation immediately to pull back its forces to barracks and to start real talks and negotiations. We as a new Ukrainian government are ready to hold an open dialogue how to tackle this dramatic crisis of the 21st century. And this is not the crisis just between Ukraine and Russia. It's worse. This is the global crisis. As in case if Russia moves further, this would definitely undermine the entire global security. And I am wondering about the goals of Russia. To draw the new lines, to revise the outcomes of the Second World War, to restore the Soviet Union, or to preserve peace and stability in the region, and to stick to its international obligations. On behalf of the Ukrainian government, I would like to underline that we adhere to all international, multilateral, and bilateral obligations, including the Russian Black Sea Deployment Treaty. But we urge Russia to stick to its conditions and to execute the international obligations. We are facing an ongoing economic crisis, which is the consequences of a rampant corruption of the former president and of the former government. And we do believe that the talks that we resumed with the IMF would successfully accomplish. We fully realize that the IMF program is not a sweet candy, but on the other hand, my country desperately needs real reforms to stabilize Ukrainian economy, to overhaul the entire financial sector, and to move further in terms of economic success and economic prosperity. We relaunched and restarted negotiations with our European partners. And we command a strong and solid support of the American people that you demonstrated to the Ukrainian people, of all EU member states, heads of governments and presidents, that they made in their statement last week, saying that Ukraine is to be a sovereign, independent country. And I'm sure that next week, Ukraine is to sign a political part of the association agreement and to make a very solid and strong step in order to make Ukraine an integral part of the European Union. What's at stake today? The future of my country and the freedom of my people. It's all about freedom. And we want to be very clear. We will never surrender. We will do everything in order to save the country, in order to save my people, and in order to have my country as an independent one. We heavily rely on the support of the Western world. And we do get this support. And we do understand that it's up to Ukrainian people to shape our future. The new Ukrainian government is ready to deliver changes. We are ready to implement reforms. But you can't do it having Russian tanks and Russian soldiers on your soil. I'm still very optimistic. I'm still very optimistic because you always need to believe. And I believe that we will find the solution, that we will tackle this crisis, and that we will do everything to make Ukraine a prosperous and pro-European state. Ready for any kind of Q&A? So let's go down to business.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for those remarks. I'm Damon Wilson, Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. I want to reiterate Fred Kemp's welcome to you, Mr. Prime Minister, and to all of our guests. Thank you for those remarks. It's all about freedom. Ukraine will never surrender, and an inordinate sense of optimism in this time of challenge. I want to get our conversation started with a few questions, then we'll turn to the audience. You've just come here from the White House. Many of us were watching sort of in real time as you were sitting there with President Obama in the Oval Office, getting a very strong statement of support from the United States. Simply your visit here on the eve of the vote in Crimea is that symbol of support. These have been private conversations, of course, but what can you tell us? What were you seeking on your visit to Washington? How have your talks gone? Do you feel comfortable that the United States and the European Union are now prepared to act in concrete terms in support of Ukraine?
I will try to tell everything I can. It was very open and frank discussion. And we avoided, all this diplomatic language. We appreciate the support that the American people and the US president and the US government and this bipartisan support that you demonstrated. And it's great to have the EU and the US speaking in one voice, speaking in a single voice. I see that the Western world is determined to preserve Ukraine's integrity and to preserve Ukraine's independence. What we already got a package of financial aid. It's on the table. Both from we need to accomplish the IMF deal, but the key factor is that the United States already announced $1 billion of guarantees for the stabilization of Ukrainian economy. And we got very strong statements of the European Union and of the United States saying that they will do whatever they can to support the Ukrainian people and actually to protect Ukraine. I'm satisfied with the way the US and the EU helps us to handle this crisis.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, if I may, you said in your remarks that you would never surrender. Ukraine would never surrender. As we've heard, in many regards, the strategy that you had on the Maidan has become a strategy for Ukraine today in this crisis. How do you see this playing out? What is Ukraine's strategy? In your remarks, you said you follow this peaceful diplomatic process, but that it's not inevitable that that can continue. Help us understand what you're thinking in terms of Ukraine's strategy in this crisis.
Much will depend on the strategy of Russia. much will depend on the personal vision and stance of President Putin. I would like to reiterate that we still want to have a free, equal, and partnership relations with Russia. And you can do it having a military incursion. We do not consider a military option as the best option how to fix this crisis. No. In the new globalized world, we need to find out the better off-ramp strategies. And I still insist on political and diplomatic tools. What is the best strategy? The best strategy is to sit and to negotiate. What is the best approach for Russia is just to stop and to calm down.
So what do you think President Putin's strategy is? What are his goals vis-a-vis Ukraine? How far is he willing to take this? And is his calculation affected by what's happening in Brussels and Washington today?
It's better to ask President Putin, because it seems to me that he's the only person who knows. But there are different case scenarios. You know, that they made this incursion on the artificial grounds, saying that Russia decided to protect Russian-speaking minority. And I was absolutely astonished with this. And that's not only because my wife speaks Russian. She doesn't need any kind of protection. And my kids too. We as a new Ukrainian government will preserve the rights of all minorities, including Russian-speaking. And you probably know that in the first days of the new house, not new house, of the new government, a law on the languages was repealed, but an acting president decided not to sign this law. And it means that Russian-speaking minority is under the full, entire, and comprehensive protection. So no grounds at all. Another reason was so-called anti-Semitic. Probably President Putin doesn't know that this is the first government where a deputy prime minister represents the Jewish community. Then President Putin said some stuff about fascists, protesters. No evidence at all. And we are the government who will fight with anyone who proclaims something that resembles fascists or Nazis. The first scenario for President Putin is to take over Crimea in one or another form. But he can move further. And they definitely have another case scenario, how to grab and to take over entire Ukraine, including the Ukrainian capital. Again, it all depends on his personal goals. You probably do remember his speech a few years ago saying that the biggest disaster of the last century is the collapse of the Soviet Union. I will say that the biggest disaster of this century would be the restoring of the Soviet Union.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I think that's actually an important statement. Let me ask one last question, then turn to the audience. I've just come back from Kyiv, and in meetings with government, with civil society, walking through even the streets of the Maidan today, you feel an incredible sense of unity, steady resolve, that folks recognize Ukraine's in a crisis and need to come together. But we first had the opportunity to meet in the heady days of 2004, 2005. How is this time different? You recall back then that great optimism was undermined as infighting undermined unity, as political jockeying challenged the efforts of actual good governance. How is this time a different opportunity for Ukraine? How do you get your task right?
Very different, I would say. Because look what has happened. The previous regime killed 101 innocent people. The death toll is more than 100 people. For what? For their fight to have the free country? For their freedoms and liberties? So the revolution of 2004, it was a peaceful one. The revolution of 2013 and actually 14, in 10 years, this was the revolution with the blood stains on the jacket of the former president and the former government. And sentiments are very different. But on the other hand, people are very united. People have shown their courage and their determination to fight for the country. And this is really the great sign for this country. We have not just the territory after this revolution. We have the country, and we have not just the people, but we have the nation. And this is the outcomes.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. There are a huge number of folks who are quite interested in your country, have been working on it for a long time. So let me turn to the audience. I'm going to ask, as I call on you, take the mic. We'll start right here, to this gentleman. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself. Your affiliation, and ask a quick question, please. The Prime Minister is on a tight schedule. We want to try to get as many questions in as possible, please. Go ahead.
Michael Gordon, New York Times. Sir, you said you're interested in a political solution with Russia. Could you elaborate a little bit your vision of what a political solution might look like? And also, under what conditions, what circumstances might there be a referendum in Crimea or Ukraine nationally as part of that political solution? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, first we need to start the dialogue and negotiations. If it's about Crimea, we as a Ukrainian government are ready to start a nationwide dialogue how to increase the rights of Autonomous Republic Crimea, starting with taxes and ending with another aspects like language issues. We are ready to start this dialogue, but the constitutional one in the Ukrainian parliament, having everyone sitting at the table, discussing every single issue, and making each step in the constitutional manner. You mentioned this so-called referendum. This is the pre-ordered referendum with an expected result. It seems to me that they already cast the ballots. There is no legal grounds for this referendum at all. What we need to do, we need to pass a law in the House which allows so-called local referendums. And only afterwards, this referendum could be a constitutional one. But my message is very clear. This is illegitimate, unconstitutional referendum. There is no legitimate government in Crimea. There are some folks who get the support of 18,000 Russian soldiers and who seized unconstitutionally and grabbed the power in Crimea.
Mr. Prime Minister, let me pick up two questions right here. This woman and then Harlan Ullman next, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Wei Xuejiao from China Central Television. Although you said it's unconstitutional, but as we know, the Crimea referendum is getting nearer. So how positive do you think by negotiation to solve this kind of problem, especially just within 4 days? And after you met Barack Obama and John Kerry today, what's the most difficulty thing here in solving Ukraine crisis? Thank you.
Why don't I pick up the second question right next to her so you can take both of these.
Prime Minister, I'm Harlan Ullman at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for your stirring remarks. I want to fast forward a bit. If Putin does not withdraw from Crimea and indeed moves westward, this could easily make Crimea into his Afghanistan. Could you just comment on the prospects of an insurgency? There are already reports of jihadis moving to Crimea.
That's what we want to avoid. And just take into consideration that Crimea is a heavily and highly populated area, including Crimean Tatars. And this could raise an ethnic question too. That's the reason why Ukrainian government is very cautious and prudent. They tried to provoke us a number of times. And when Russian Duma allowed the Russian president to use military force on the Ukrainian territory, they expected us to do the same, to impose a martial law and to start a military operation. We do understand the ratio in the military strengths between Ukraine and Russia. I can, for example, give you the numbers of aircraft facilities, 1 to 98, excluding the nuclear aspect. So I would like to reiterate again, we need to do everything we can. I mean, if everyone in the world who wants to preserve peace and stability in order to avoid the bloodshed. Because if it starts, there will be no end.
All right, if I might turn to Nadia. Let me turn to the next question here. Please, over here, microphone. And then we'll pick up David Kramer right here in the front. You can ask the second one.
Nadia McConnell, U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. Mr. Prime Minister, how confident can the people of Ukraine and your government be that the Western support that is being promised, including economic sanctions, will actually be realized? History of assurances to Ukraine is not very encouraging, and I will only cite one. No international pledging conference for Chernobyl met its goal.
Thanks. And perhaps we'll pick up David's here as well.
Mr. Prime Minister, a warm welcome to you here in Washington.
And introduce yourself.
Sorry, David Kramer with Freedom House. Dealing with Russian occupation of your territory is an urgent crisis. Trying to fix the economy is an urgent crisis. But in a little more than 2 months, presidential elections are scheduled. There are reports, rumors of postponing those elections. How confident are you that Ukraine will be ready to hold elections on the 25th? And how ready will it be to have credible elections that everyone can recognize? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Starting with the first question, it's not just about Ukraine, what I already mentioned. It's about the global security. Because let me remind you that in 1994, a Budapest memorandum emerged, where signatories guaranteed an independence and territorial integrity for the Ukrainian state. And look what has happened. We abandoned our nuclear weapon, right? We did it. We executed this memorandum. And today, we ask for the protection. If we don't get this protection, tell me the way how the world is to reinforce or ask another countries to stop their nuclear programs. It's impossible to convince, in this case, someone to halt nuclear proliferation programs. This is the global problem. And it's up to all of us to fix it. David, on the elections, on the presidential elections, elections are scheduled at the 25th of March. And, May. And we are ready to hold free and fair elections. We do understand that a number of folks will do everything in order to undermine these elections, to stop them, to postpone, to delay, to have another kind of mess and uncertainty in my country. But we launched this. The Central Election Commission is working in its schedule. We amended the state budget, so we are ready to hold free and fair presidential elections. We asked in international observers to observe these elections, and I still believe, not just believe, I'm sure, that elections are to be held as scheduled, and that on the 25th of May, the new president will not the new president, but on the 25th of May, we will have a clear picture who is to be the new president, because this is a two-round elections and the horse race in another 2 weeks.
That's right. That's right. Let me take two questions up front, and then I'll move to the back. Please, with the mic right here in the second row, George and Ambassador Gashidze.
George Shapivsky, private individual. I'd like to first congratulate you on rising to the challenge of this situation, which poses a risk to Ukraine, obviously. And you and your government and the people as a whole have obviously risen to this challenge with great fortitude and conviction, because you and the nation recognize the risk. My question is, does the rest of the world, in your estimation, also recognize that the risk? That this is not just a risk to Ukraine, but it's a risk really to the stable world order. It's a risk that forebodes the possibility of a new wave of aggression that spreads not just in Eastern Europe, but throughout the globe. And in your estimation, in dealing with this problem, do you feel that the international community sufficiently recognizes what's at stake?
Thank you. Just pass the mic down. We'll take Ambassador Gagashidze on this one as well, please.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, first of all, I would like to express my sympathy and support on behalf of my government to just cause for the sake of the united and democratic Ukraine.
And just for our audience, Ambassador Gagashidze, Ambassador of Georgia.
My question is, obviously, what we are witnessing these days is not the first instance when Russia is violating international law to the end of the Cold War. 5 years ago, on the smaller scale, but still the similar events happened in Georgia. So my question would be, what are the lessons learned on one hand for your government in order to navigate in these very difficult circumstances? And on the other hand, what are the lessons to be learned by international community from the events back in Georgia to be more effective in this case, in this crisis? Thank you.
Why don't we take those and then I'll move to the back, so please.
Thank you for congratulations. Some folks sent me condolences. But again, I am still optimistic. We are ready to sacrifice, I mean, my government is ready to sacrifice its political capital in order to tackle this crisis, and me personally too.
You were even referred to the task as a political suicide.
Oh, sometimes it happens. So let me put it this way. On the conflict that emerged in 2008 in Georgia, these are the implications of Bucharest summit holding NATO. Map. If you don't have map, you have something else, like military aggression. And this is the dramatic lesson for all of us. And we need to articulate a real response to this kind of situation. And let's be frank, there is no clear-cut response. We are trying to find a way out, how to handle it. But the collective bodies that are responsible for the global security are not as efficient as they have to be. In this way, I used a very diplomatic language.
With that, let me move to the back. I want to pick up Jackson Deal, this woman right here, and then Anders, please. Jackson, please, the mic in the back.
Two last questions.
Okay. Yes, this will be our last round, please.
Jackson Deal, Washington Post. The EU and the United States are talking about adopting additional sanctions on Monday or early next week if the referendum goes forward. Is the government of Ukraine contemplating any sanctions towards Crimea? And in particular, are you planning to continue the provision of water, energy, and other imports to Crimea?
Jackson, why don't you pass the mic down to this woman on the row? We'll pick that up.
Alena Taranova, Public Television Slovakia. Mr. Prime Minister, we would like to know what kind of actions do you expect in next week from your neighboring countries like Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Poland? Thank
and
you.
let me take the final question here from Anders, please.
Anders Åslund, Peterson Institute. Thank you very much for a very impressive statement to us today, Mr. Prime Minister. We really wish you all the very best. And on that line, what is the wish list with regard to national security that you would put to the United States and the European Union today? Thank you.
On our ability to provide water and electricity to Crimea, I want to be very clear that Crimea is an integral part of Ukraine. And we will do everything in order to deliver food, water, electricity to our people. Because this is our territory and they are our citizens. On the European side, we expect that on the 21st, Ukraine is to sign a political part of the association agreement, and this is the best reply and the best answer what kind of contribution the EU could make. The EU already made a statement that they will unilaterally apply an economic package from the DCFTA, and this would substantially support the Ukrainian economy. What is the best way to reform the country is to stick to the political association agreement and to execute everything what's written in this deal. And the last question, what we ask for, I already unfolded everything. We need to act boldly, wisely, and strongly. And to use all tools that are acceptable to tackle this crisis. The US is a powerful country. The EU is a very strong unity and can and will, I believe, do everything to preserve Ukrainian independence. I would be happy in case if Ukraine can handle this crisis solemnly. No. And again, I want to be open and frank. We are not as powerful, and we don't have enough capacity to withstand. But if we speak in one voice, if we act in concert, we can save my country and preserve peace and stability in the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Please join me in thanking the Prime Minister for these remarks. That's fantastic. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll escort you out.